Good afternoon, guys. Dr. Ken Nordberg again here with another seminar for you, fireside seminar. But it won't be long. It'll be nice to have a fire in that fireplace again. Today's seminar is about what bucks and other deer are doing in October. And this is kind of an important seminar for all of us, no matter when you hunt deer. Before I start, I want to get one thing straight. It's been kind of bugging me. One of the things I've learned is that there are quite a lot of people who don't think global warming exists. And I can understand that. That term has gone through all kinds of changes, and from bogus to whatever. And I can understand that. And one of the things I just hate, I just hate, when somebody sends me a letter and tells me it's BS. And I hate that. But like I said, I kind of have to agree. It's a term that just means so many different things and it's gone through so many changes. But what I'm really talking about when I use that term is abnormally warm weather. Is that what I'm really dealing with? After whitetails have grown their winter fur, you can have 190-degree temperatures where you live, in Texas or Alabama, wherever, really hot. And yet your deer, the deer you hunt in the area where you live, are out there in the fields eating like they normally do. Everything seems to be really normal. And the reason is that during the summer months, whitetails have this thin reddish coat, and the heat doesn't bother them as much. But by the end of September, they've grown their winter fur. And like here in Minnesota, that's good for 45 degrees below zero for a long period. So you might not get that kind of temperature where you are, but your deer grow winter fur as well as ours do. And when temperatures are really abnormally high after the end of September, into our hunting seasons, like bow hunting in October and then our firearm hunting seasons in November, that's really going to affect whitetails and your success as a whitetail hunter. So from now on, I'm not going to say those two awful words. I don't want to get any controversy with anybody. I don't want to argue about whether it's right or wrong. And like I say, I can understand how you might think about that. But one thing I'm not going to change on that. The abnormally warm weather after whitetails have grown their winter coats does really affect our hunting success and what whitetails are doing. So during the month of October, we're talking about October now, we're going to start seeing effects by abnormally warm weather. Now, I was just looking in, checking into future, forecasts for hunting in our area in November. And one of the forecasts said that, we're going to have temperatures in the 30s and the 40s during the day in November, during the first half of November when we're hunting. And the temperature will be down into the 30s and 20s at night. And that sounds pretty nice, that sounds like ideal weather for whitetail hunting where we are. And if that's true, if we don't have any temperatures higher than 50 degrees during that 2-week period of time, our whitetails are going to be acting normally like they've been doing for years and years and years. But lately, especially in the last 15 years or so, we've been getting more and more of abnormally hot weather during the month of November when we're hunting. And in October too, and bow hunting. And when that happens, when our temperatures go over 50 degrees where we hunt, our whitetails aren't going to move all day long. Boy, it's just too hot for them when they got their winter coats. And so they're just going to lay in the shade somewhere all day long And they're not feed or drink water. Well, that's not exactly true, but they're not, you just aren't going to see many deer, if any, moving around during daylight hours when those temperatures are that high. They might move around early in the morning, but in the evening, but they're going to wait till it gets cool at night, which is what whitetail, that's, you know, that's a smart thing to do. Wait till it's cool at night. And if breeding is going on, and it certainly will be when we're going to be hunting there, breeding will be going on, they'll even reserve breeding-related activities until it is cool at night. And that doesn't bother whitetails to do that because their vision is good at night as it is during the day. That's fine with them. But it sure is tough on stand hunting. I mean, when you get a day like when it's, you know, last year and the year before, we have 70-degree temperatures in November. And when you're sitting in a tree stand out there in the woods, when it's that warm, it's just, there's nothing happening. It's just quiet, nothing, no deer moving. You can have all kinds of tracks in the trail there in front of you, or here's this area where they've been feeding, you know, every day when the temperatures are normal, and there's nothing there all day long. And that's disgusting. It really is. And so what my sons and I, especially John and I, have been doing now in the last 4 years now, is working on ways, things we can do to improve deer hunting when temperatures are abnormally warm. And like I say, that's been happening more and more. In fact, it's been going on for about 15 years now. You know, and it's been a gradual thing. And you guys that haven't hunted more than 15 years, you probably think, well, this is the way it's always been, but it hasn't been that way before that time. Back when I was young, we couldn't wait for October, mid-October. We usually got freezing temperatures at night that it got down below 32 degrees at night, and there would be frost out there in the woods. And that's what it took to trigger this frenzy of antlered bucks making antler rubs and ground scrapes all over the area we hunted. Oh, there was antler rubs and ground scrapes all over the place. And I come here when we were young guys and say, oh man, are they rutting out there? No, hunters used to believe that breeding was going on when all these fresh antler rubs and ground scrapes were being made. But as we learned over the years, and the considerable research I've done on whitetail rut, that is just the preliminary to the breeding phase of the rut. During the last 15 years or so, we've been getting more and more of this abnormally warm temperatures. And it got to the point where this was probably the main reason why our bucks, our antlered bucks, quit this frenzy of making antler rubs and ground scrapes during the last half of October, like they used to do, because we didn't get any freezing temperatures in the middle of October. This might not even happen until maybe a week or two into November. But at that time, they're already breeding, and they don't have time for that. Well, the lesser, we'll get into that, but that's not the period during which most antler rubs and ground scrapes are made. And for a couple of reasons, one of them being is that dominant breeding bucks, when breeding is going on, just don't have time for that anymore. And besides, if it's abnormally warm, they don't want to do it anyway. They don't want to exert themselves unnecessarily. Then at night, finally gets cool, and you got these does that are in heat out there. They're not going to be making antler rubs and ground scrapes at that point. So we don't see much of that now. And you guys that maybe just started hunting 10 years ago, you don't realize that this change occurred. And that what you're seeing today is probably like it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But it isn't, not at all. It's really different now. And so us old guys that are used to seeing all those antler rubs and ground scrapes, which were, you know, they were absolute evidence of the existence of bucks in our hunting area. And you see an antler rub on a tree 6 inches in diameter, that long, and, you know, you say, oh, there's a big one out here to make a rub on a tree that size. Or if you saw a ground scrape and there was dirt kicked down over the snow 20 feet away and all that kind of moss and leaves kicked with, Oh man, that was a big dominant breeding buck, and he was mad, which is common while breeding's going on. So those are exciting deer signs to find in the woods years ago. So, but nowadays we just don't see much of that. Probably most of the antler rubs we do see are those that are made by bucks that are shedding velvet, rubbing velvet off their antlers. And that usually occurs over a 3-day period, and some bucks will rub on quite a few in a small area. And some guys will say, oh man, they're breeding early this year, look at this. Well, they aren't, they're just getting rid of velvet at that time, around September 1st, that's when that happens. So, okay, now, we're all through with September now, we talked about this last time. Now we're in October, so now you want to know what's going on during this month, especially if you're a bow hunter, but you should know it too, because if you only hunt in November during the firearm hunting season, you need to know these things too, because if you're out there, say you went out there, maybe mid-October to scout, you say, well, I'll get out there 2 or 3 weeks before the hunting season begins, and I'm going to look around for tracks and droppings made by big bucks, trails they use, that kind of thing. Get ready for the hunting season. Or hang up trail cams out there and, hope you see big buck on some of this, and that'll maybe influence you to hunt in a certain spot, which isn't the best, most reliable way to find a good place to hunt older bucks. But you're out there to do that thing for hunting in November. But between that time and when you hunt there, things can change a whole bunch. So what you learn then may not may not really improve your hunting success at all if you don't know what is going to happen between the time you scout and the time you start hunting again. So it's important to know what's going on in that time. So let's begin on October 1st. Now, our whitetails now have got their winter coats on. So now, from this point on, they're going to be terribly affected by abnormally warm temperatures. But, as years passed, these 15 years, we had a lot of years when temperatures were really normal. In 2018, we had hip-deep snow on day 1 of our hunting season in November. So, and we certainly didn't have any abnormally warm temperatures that hunting season. With all that snow around, it just didn't get really hot out there. But the last 2 hunting seasons we did. But anyway, so you can have everything quite normal. Whitetails feeding during normal hours in the morning and the evening, and bedding midday like they always do. And it does, when breeding begins in Europe, it's the same every single year, almost to the date, plus or minus a day or two, because the ratio of darkness to sunlight that triggers heat or breeding in does is the same every year. That isn't affected by air temperatures at all. It might seem like it does because, let's say, like where we hunt, it's November 3rd now. This is the day when breeding begins where we hunt. But, well, it might happen on the 3rd in this square mile over here where a couple of us might hunt on the opener. And on that square mile, it might not be till the 4th. And sometimes maybe it started on the 2nd. It isn't necessarily every doe. And only about 10 or 12% of does are in heat on any one day during the 2 weeks that this is going on. Just 10 or 12%, which means probably maybe 1 or 2 does in this square mile are going to be in heat, and maybe one over there, maybe none in that one over there on the 3rd. And each day it's going to be just a small number of does. Sometimes you can get several does in heat in the same day, and if a buck is with the doe in heat during that period, and these other does that are in heat, they won't wait around. They're going to start looking for the big buck, and all of a sudden here's this buck. He's got 3 does in heat with him, and they're young. They're yearlings and fawns. They stay with their mothers, and they're all there except yearling bucks. Those older bucks don't want any yearling bucks around, but they don't want any competition for breeding. But at any rate, it looks like they got a harem out there. So we're going to go from the 1st of October. Now, last time we talked about how after bucks shed their velvet around the 1st of September, they want to battle with each other. And at first, these little battles maybe only last 5-10 seconds, and then, but later on, and we get to the end of September, they start to become more serious. And you get into the first half of October, some of those battles can be prolonged, and those bucks can actually hurt one another. You know, it can be bleeding. And I know in some cases where bucks were killed by big dominant breeding bucks during this period, gored to death by having, you know, tines of that big buck being rammed right into the opponent's chest cavity. So it was like being stabbed several times, and the opponent died. That doesn't happen real often, but it can happen. So during the first half of October, we still got this fighting going on. In other words, you know, last time we talked about the ideal spot to hunt big bucks when you're quail hunting is where these bucks get together to feed. They all come together during this period so they can battle a little bit at the end of feeding cycles. And this way they determine which one of them is going to be most dominant, and that's going to be the one that's going to, nature intended to do all the breeding and pass the superior genetics on to the next generation of fawns. So we got fighting going on during the first half. But if it's abnormally warm, you aren't going to have any of that happening. If it's really warm, those bucks are going to stay in their bedding areas instead of getting together and battling late in feeding cycle. They're going to stay there. And if they're hungry and they're thirsty, big bucks especially like to bed close to water. Like, I would say 90% of the big dominant bucks, dominant breeding bucks I've known, have bedded within 100 yards of water. So they don't, during the period that they're growing antlers, like in the summertime, they don't have to go far to get water when it's hot in the summertime. Well, same thing, if it's abnormally warm in October, they want to be close so they don't have to walk any great distance to drink water during the heat of the day. So they're usually cold. That's a good tip. When you're hunting for big bucks, it's good to know where that is, where these bedding areas are. Your first place to look is close to watering sites, right? Places where whitetails have been going to water to drink. A lot of deer tracks there at the water's edge, and if you got deer tracks there that are like 3.5, 4 inches in these northern states, you're looking at tracks of a trophy class buck. And those watering spots are prime spots to hunt in abnormally warm weather. And especially if it's been dry for a while, you know, kind of drought-like in the fall, not much rain, and so there isn't a lot of puddles around through your hunting area where a deer could go and drink anywhere they want to, and they don't have to travel far to find food. But if it's been dry, then these places where they drink water become fewer and fewer, and so they get to be really important places to hunt when it's dry and hot, these watering spots. And as a matter of fact, even though whitetails can become nocturnal and limit most of their activities to nighttime hours only at night because it's abnormally warm during the day and they got their winter coats, I know that whitetails will become so thirsty in really hot weather that they're going to go to water during the middle of the day even. And so watering sites can be places where you can expect to see whitetails going to drink any hour of the day when it's really abnormally warm. So keep that in mind. So all of a sudden, if it's dry and it's hot, you should be hunting near watering sites in that second half of October, well, all October for that matter. Now, when you get to the second half of October, things start changing again. Remember, there's things, I was saying in September, things are a lot different at the end of September than they are in the first part of September. Well, it's going to be that way again in October. Now, normally, if your temperatures are normal, you know, like where we hunt, if we got frost at night, around the middle of October, those whitetails are going to be really active early and late in the day and that kind of thing, making antler ups and ground scrapes. During the second half of October, if temperatures are normal or even subnormal, you can expect whitetails to be really active. In that case, you might have quite a few bucks making antler rubs and ground scrapes, even though, they might not be doing much of it when it's really warm. They might not see any of that when it's really warm, but they could be being active, making antler rubs and ground scrapes during that period. But when you get to the last week in October, about that time, it's been pretty well established by these bucks who's the boss buck of this square mile. This buck, this biggest buck there, he'll generally have a home range that's larger than the home range of any other deer. He's going to be the boss of this square mile that all around where he lives. All this is his territory. And in that square mile there might be 4 or 5 does with young, with fawns and yearlings living with them in different separate spots. And normally they don't live together. Each doe has its own home range, and they're about 125 acres in size. It can be 90, it can be 200, depending on how many deer live in that area, but they live in their own separate little home ranges. And so in the second half of November, there's these does living in these separate home ranges, and they don't let other does with them come in their home ranges. They chase them out, kick them. Man, they can really, really rough on other does that invade their ranges. But you have 4 or 5 of them around in that square mile. And then usually there's another 3, maybe 4 or even 5 bucks 2.5 years of age or older living in that range, besides that big dominant bleeding buck. Now, during the summer months and fall, September and October, he doesn't mind all those other bucks living in there, and those bucks don't have separate ranges. Their ranges overlap, They can be half a square miles in size, and yet they kind of share portions of their ranges. Their ranges are all overlapping and overlap doe ranges as well. So they're all mixed up in here. But when you get to that last week in October, those big dominant bucks are thinking, they know, they've been around for a number of years. Most of them have been there 4.5 to 6.5 years of age, and so this is old stuff to them. Pretty soon they know does are going to be in heat. And this is the most important time of their lives, because they're just driven to breed all those does during the spring, and they don't want competition. And so during that last week, they generally start chasing all those other bucks out of that square mile that they're bossing. They don't want them in there. Now, some of those older bucks might be the same age as the big dominant breeding buck, might even have antlers as big. Some of them are real trophy bucks, even though they're not the dominant buck. But they just don't happen to be as heavy or strong, maybe, or as aggressive. Aggressive behavior is important to become a dominant breeding buck. They might not just be as mean and vicious during battle, so they lose battle. But they all get chased out. Now, the older ones of these lesser bucks that are, lower in their pecking order, they're used to this. This is an old thing. We've been through this last year and the year before and the year after that, and they know that big dominant breeding buck from this point on is going to be dangerous. And he's not going to mess around with them. If they catch them back in that square mile during the period that does are in heat, he's going to attack them, and they could get hurt. And they know that's bad. So a lot of those older bucks, they'll willingly be chased off range, and when they get off range, they got a favorite little hiding place outside of that square mile. Maybe between, there might be another square mile over here owned by this dominant breeding buck, another one, and there's areas in between, maybe swamps and bogs and places like that, where these older bucks, they can go there and live there for a couple of weeks without being bothered, and they won't be bothered by these big mean dominant breeding bucks. So they got these little hideaways. Now, the only deer that don't understand that is yearlings. they've never been through this before. And they're, at their age, when they're a year and a half, even though they're living with their mothers, they're starting to act like breeding bucks. When you're getting to this point, they want to make antler rubs, which are really signposts of intended breeding ranges. When a buck makes a bunch of antler rubs and ground scrapes in there, he's making markers that can be seen by other bucks, and they smell with odors on them. You know, the musk of their tarsal glands, and also from the glands on their forehead. They're up on top there between the antlers. Really pungent musk odor comes from there. And they rub that on tree branches, over their ground scrapes, and on antler rubs. And then other bucks, they see those and smell them, and oh, this is a sign of the big dominant buck, and that means keep up. And that's fresh. They like, during that 2-week period, they want to renew the odors of those antler rubs and ground scrapes at least once every 24 to 48 hours. Because what they want, when other bucks might sneak back, they're going to smell it, and they're fresh. That means that big buck is in business, and he's dangerous, and I better get out of here. It means no trespassing. Okay? Like I said, during this period, the older bucks generally stay away willingly during this period of breeding. But those yearling bucks, they don't know about this. And so the big buck chases them off, and they run. Oh man, here comes this guy. He's really vicious. I got to get away from him. They get off range, and they don't know what to do. You know, they're still dependent on their mothers, especially when they're in danger. You know, well, I feel like they're in danger. I got to go find my mother, so I can be safe. So they race back to their mother. They keep going back, and the big dominant buck comes on. Geez, here's that yearling buck back again. He has to chase them off. And yearling bucks are kind of a thorn on the side of these big dominant breeding bucks while breeding is going on because of that. So, but anyway, by the end of that month, October, this square mile that had 3 to 5 antlered bucks, 2.5 years of age or older, 2.5 all the way up to 6.5, and not many ever survived the 7th winter, so that's the range you're going to have of bucks in your hunting area, those ages. They're all gone except the dominant breeding buck and maybe an occasional yearling buck, a forky or spike buck. You'll see those every once in a while, all the way till the end of breeding is over because of what's going on there. So anyway, you go out there and say first half of October and you're scouting and you find these deer signs, and then you say, oh man, this really looks good. Well, and you go back there in November and where's all the bucks? The breeding's going, yeah, you saw all these deer signs and now you don't see anything here. What's going on here? Well, what's going on here is a normal thing every year, and especially when temperatures are normal. Now, if they're abnormally high, like they've been lately, a lot, you might not see anything, even dominant breeding bucks and yearling bucks, even they might not be moving around. Although yearlings, they're becoming independent from their mothers at this time of year. And some of them will, instead of being smart like their mothers and staying in their beds all day when it's really hot, they might go out anyway and feed and go drink water. And like last year, the only buck we took last year because of abnormally hot weather and temperatures in the 70s, mind you, was a yearling buck. And because he was foolish, he wasn't being smart like its mother and all the other deer, and it's out there at 10 o'clock in the morning feeding, and he ran into one of my grandsons, and that was the end of that buck. But boy, was that good medicine we got from that buck. So anyway, and I don't mind grandsons taking a yearling, but anyway, so you have to, if you know all this stuff is going on in October, then you'll understand why things are happening the way they are in November, you see. So you know at this point you can't depend on so much on what you see in the beginning of November or even the middle of October to decide where to hunt in November, because it could be really different for two reasons. One is that the normal thing is that the big bucks chase all these other bucks out of there, and so now you only have the big guy out there for a while, and all the others are hiding in these places outside of that square mile. And we've done pretty well hunting some of those other bucks that hide in little places outside of the square mile. We learned where they bed, and some of those bucks make all kinds of antler rubs in those little areas. This small area might be 1 or 2 acres in size, and that's it. And there may be only one deer trap and just full of antler rubs and ground scrapes. And this buck goes up and down those every day, renewing them. And they're so obvious, and we've taken some nice bucks on some of those hideaways during the hunting season. But we're always trying to get the big guys, but the big guys are the most difficult of whitetails to hunt with, so we don't always get them, and they're smart. So sometimes we settle for maybe a 3.5-year-old buck or now and then, and they aren't too bad. Their antlers aren't as heavy, they aren't as bulky, but they're almost got the dimensions of the big 4.5 to 6.5-year-old bucks. So that's not so bad. We'll settle for those when you're having trouble trying to take a really big one. But anyway, so that's what's going on there. So keep that in mind now. Now this year, you have to be prepared for two things, abnormally hot weather and normal weather. It's all right to be ready for the normal weather, and whitetails feeding in these same places every year like they do, and being out there, when you get out there in the morning, they're already out there feeding, and about 9, 10 o'clock, they start heading back to their bedding areas, and they'll be in the bedding areas during the middle of the day, and then by 3, 4 in the afternoon, they'll be coming out to feed again. You can depend on that when the temperatures are normal. And during that period when the breeding is going on, you want to hunt where does are feeding, because if any of them are in heat, that big buck is going to be with them, and that's going to be your place to take a big buck during that in November. So you be thinking about that, You might think when you're out there in October, oh boy, look at this trail, all these big tracks and droppings, and say, well, this is a big buck. Look, he's got 1-inch droppings, that long clump. Oh, it's a big one here. This is the place. Oh, you get a night. Look at this trail cam. Look at the size of the buck. Can't wait to hunt here. But when you get out there in November, where did that buck go? We've used to be suckers for that years ago. Oh man, this place to hunt. And we learned the hard way that things are different. You can't depend on trail cam pictures taken early as the spot to hunt bucks later in November. You have to depend on other deer signs. Now, if it's abnormally warm and they aren't moving, then you got to start hunting different places, like trails that big bucks use a lot when they're searching for does in heat. And they don't use any old trails, just certain ones of them. So those, I call them buck trails, but they're trails where you find tracks of older bucks that might be 3 3/4 of an inch long to 4 inches long. That's a big buck. Hey, you probably want that. That'll be on the wall if you get that one. And droppings that are anywhere from 3/4 of an inch in length to maybe 1.125 inches, 1.25 inches. We get them that big. And then those trails that are used while bucks are searching for does in heat are the trails to use. Now, the trouble is they may not use those trails in October at all. Here's a deer trail and you look at it, there's nothing there. Then you come there in November and, oh, look at these big tracks of big bucks. Now, if you learn that the year before and the year before that, then you should be thinking, hey, that might be the trail this year that I should be hunting on, where that big buck was making all those tracks and droppings in November. And then your odds of taking a big one are all of a sudden much better. And especially that trail is one that tunnels or increases the likelihood of a buck using that specific trail. For example, there's a trail kind of across this elder swamp or this cedar swamp or cattail swamp, whatever. between this highland and that highland over there, and this is the only trail to go from here to there, or this is a trail between doe ranges. Those kind of trails are the ones that big buck is going to use most often while does are nesting, because they're the trails that enable a buck to find does and heat more quickly and with the least amount of effort. So they're important to that buck. So you want those. And if it's abnormally warm, they're going to be going to water during the day. Those big bucks are not as nocturnal as does and their young when it's abnormally warm, when does are in heat. Those bucks are going to be traveling day and night looking for those does. So you can get a big buck in the middle of the day when it's abnormally warm, especially at a place where he's now thirsty and he needs a drink of water. So watering sites become important when it's really warm. And then also, the very first hour of the day, now deer that are nocturnal, they're likely to be still active during especially the first half, the first legal shooting hour of the day, because that is the coolest hour of the day. No matter how hot, it might be 70 degrees at noon, but it might be still only 32 degrees during that first hour or half hour of the day in the morning. And that first legal hour starts a half hour before sunrise. So it's still a little bit dark in that period. So those deer that are nocturnal could be still feeding, or they could be on their way to a watering site, or they could be on their way to their bedding area during that period. So they're going to be active in that first hour. You don't want to miss a minute of that when it's really warm. Then again in the evening, as soon as that sun drops below the western horizon, below the tree line, and that can start half hour before sunset. But it's starting to get long shadows again, starting to get a little bit dark where you are. An hour before during the entire last hour of the day. First thing those deer that have been nocturnal all day are going to want to do is go get a drink of water. They're really thirsty now. So again, in the evening when it's really warm, those watering sites can be a really important place to hunt. So no matter what you find, you're out there, you're scouting early in October, getting ready for the hunting season, you got to keep those kind of things in mind, because all of a sudden it's going to be different once you get into November. And now you know why, and why you need to be looking for other areas other than what you're finding in October or the first half of October when you're scouting. It's going to be different. And if you know those things, then you know where your odds are going to be best for hunting in October as a bow hunter. Or where it's going to be best in November, because you know what changes are going to happen when you get into November, by the time you get in there in November. So keep that in mind. And another thing, if you're out there scouting in October, and even the last part of it, you're not finding antler rallops and ground scrapes. There are not very many of them. Just ask yourself, has it been abnormally warm this month? And if it has, that's the reason. You might get all trying to think, well, there must not be any bucks around here this year, when that's not true at all. As many as possible. There's one other change to keep in mind, especially if you're hunting farm areas. Let's say you're hunting in corn country, like in Iowa or Indiana, Ohio, whatever, middle part of the United States, a lot of corn being grown, or soybean country, whatever. During the summer months, those, especially those with young, can be living in the big cornfields. And if you know that, and you want to go wandering through some cornfields, oh man, look at here, they've been eating corn, look at all these stalks all knocked down and the cobs all bare of corn, and you're saying, oh man, this is really great. But in November you get there, all these cornfields have been harvested. The soybeans have been harvested. And all of a sudden, the area that you scouted in October is full of deer. Because in farm areas, quite often, a lot of farm areas, forest areas are limited good size. There are woodlots here and there, and timber along creeks and swamps and that kind of thing. There's timber there. And but once crops get tall enough to hide deer, they become part of their home ranges of deer. These does have been all crowded together in these little woodlots until the corn gets tall enough. Finally get to spread out and have individual home ranges that they live in all for the rest of the summer. And then come harvest time in the fall, bingo, they're all pushed back into these wooded areas or swamps or whatever, or wet lowlands with timber in it. They're pushed back in, and all of a sudden you can have 30 deer per square mile in these places. So there again, you know, if you're out there scouting in October, boy, can there be a change between that time and November firearm hunting season. And all of a sudden these other areas are just loaded with deer, abnormal numbers. That doesn't necessarily make it easier. You got all these deer with all these extra eyes, ears, and noses out there, keeping track of what you're doing. And the young ones might not be very smart about avoiding you then, but these older ones will be plenty smart. So I'll keep that in mind. In fact, if the hunting pressure gets to be too great in places like that, they'll become nocturnal. Even if the temperatures are normal, they can start, older bucks can start limiting their travels to nighttime hours over, and that's not uncommon in farm areas. You know, if you guys that hunt farm, you know that, you know, after a couple of days, you can't find a big buck anywhere, except at night. You're driving into town, you're going to go have lunch or dinner in the evening, and here's deer in these fields, and whoa, big bucks out there in the headlights, and you know, those bucks have already learned after a couple of days, boy, they ain't to be running around in the daytime, so they just hide out all day long and only be active at night. So there again, those early morning on late afternoon hours become really important hours to be hunting whitetails in farm country, in those areas where those bucks are feeding at night, because they're getting close to being there, or they're still there when you get there really early in the morning. So keep that in mind. Well, that's a lot to know. Now, like I said, now, the problem is nowadays that we didn't have 15 years ago or earlier is this abnormal temperatures during the daytime. Now, that's becoming a fact of life now, and as time goes on, it's going to get worse, because it's so hard nowadays to get our politicians to agree on something and do it, take care of things that need to be done. And I'm just afraid, you know, the way things are going, half this planet is going to be toast before they finally get around to doing things to try to get this abnormally weather back to being normal again. So the rest of your life, you know, long after I'm gone, you're going to be dealing with what I've been telling you about today, right now. This is going to be the way it is. And you guys that think it's just, none of this is going on because you didn't know how it was 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. How about 35, 40 years ago when tree stands and doe and heat buck lures were introduced? Boy, was that the golden age of buck hunting back in those days. But boy, those deer finally learned all about those things too. But anyway, yeah, so you guys that haven't been doing this very long, you don't know this has been happening, but you're going to know it. And you're going to know that, boy, these deer are getting so tough to hunt. It's because of that abnormally warm weather. So now you know what you got to deal with and what to do about it. Now you know. I want to say one more thing now. You know, when you look back on this, on all these seminars been making, boy, there's a ton of them here. And most of them are an hour or more long. And you guys, especially that are young guys just getting started out, you're thinking, holy man, there's so much to know about how to hunt deer, and especially older bucks. And how in the world am I going to learn all this? You know, maybe we should not even think about hunting older bucks. But you know, 100 years ago, most Americans knew all these things because they had to in order to be able to take whitetails. You know, back in the until the 1930s, people could hunt deer year round. They lived off the land. Starting 400 years ago until 1930s, people were living off the land. And the only way they could get meat on the table was to go out and hunt deer now and then. Well, they couldn't be fooling around. You know, this wasn't a sport then. This was life and death. This was subsistence hunting. They had to know a lot about what I've been telling you about, except this abnormally warm stuff, about how to hunt deer and where to hunt them. Because they, you know, geez, we could use some meat on the table. I better go out and get a deer. Well, cool. They're going to wait 2 weeks to get meat on the table. We're going to have it tonight. And they had to know how they could get a deer quick. Well, we've lost all that. You know, those were rural hunters. They lived where the deer lived. But today, most of us are city residents, and we don't live with deer. Well, suburbs are, you see them, but those deer are so tame they aren't like those wild deers out in the woods. But, so, things that, you know, today is all the things that hunters used to know, American hunters used to know, have been lost. And so you're just beginning to learn. You look at all these seminars are just beginning to learn what everybody knew 100 years ago. Everybody that was a serious hunter, they knew all this stuff. But nowadays you don't. And it's pretty hard to find that kind of information nowadays. And I'm kind of an unusual guy because I've been studying habits and behavior and range utilization of whitetail since 1960. And I've seen all the changes going on. And so one of the few guys who can tell you about how it used to be and what you need to know. What I had to know, what I had to learn. When I was 10 years old already, I was learning this stuff. So, be patient with yourself even. You know, you can't learn all this stuff here between now and November 1st. That's a lot of stuff to learn. It might take you a couple, 3 years to learn everything you need to learn, but do it. And you're going to be rewarded for learning all this stuff. Now, one of the ways you can help to learn it more quickly is by one of my books, some of my books, or all of them, for that matter. But that 10th edition, the one that I published 2 years ago now, it's been really popular, it's got all this stuff in it. And you can go through it and review all this more quickly than you could in all these seminars. So that's one way of doing it. And some of these things like knowing all about tracks and droppings and antler rubs and ground scrapes and that kind of. My 4th edition of Whitetail Hunter's Almanac, it's a small one that sells for $9.95. That's got all of it in there. Those deer signs are the ABCs of buck hunting. You can't be a good buck hunter if you don't know what's in that book. How about that? But it's all there. So we call it it was often called the Dr. Nordberg sign method of hunting whitetails. Some people call it the Sherlock Holmes method of whitetail hunting. But all those deer signs, you know, you can go in, if you know what you're doing. You know, you come up the deer trail, and there's those buck tracks. Now, those tracks can tell you what kind of deer made the track. The only time you might be mistaken is that yearling bucks and mature does have the same size track. They're about the same size animals. But little deer have little tracks, and big deer have big tracks. And so little deer, well, those are fawn tracks, and these great big ones they're big buck tracks. You know, as simple as that. Same with droppings, but all kinds of signs. So you look at that, and if the deer was walking, he wasn't alarmed. And if he was heading toward this area over here where whitetails are feeding on browse or whatever they're feeding on, or acorns or whatever, that's where he's feeding right now, today. Now, that can change in a couple of weeks, but right now, that's where he's feeding. And he wasn't alarmed, so chances are he's going to be back here again the next feeding period, especially if that buck is with a doe in heat, because does are real habitual about these things, and that doe is going to come back to the same spot to feed no matter what. And if she's in heat, that buck's going to be with her. So if you found out, well, here's tracks of this buck with the doe, or other signs, I won't go into all that, but he's with a doe in heat, well, the chances are he's going to be here the next time those whitetails feed, he's going to be here again. And if you know that, you know, all these things that you can learn from a few tracks are really valuable. There's real value and hunting value in deer signs, antler rubs, ground scrapes, all these things. Real value in them. So that's why it's good to know all these things about deer signs. Things every deer hunter knew 100 years ago. But you don't. So it's time you learn. So be serious about that. You know, get yourself some good information you can refer to. Study these seminars. Well, you know, I put my heart and soul into them to try to make you better hunters. Go through them once in a while. You know, spend time. I know maybe it's hours too long. You know, maybe you're doing it at a break at work or something. You get on your computer and watch it. Well, get back to it. Yeah, you'll finally get through it all, but do it by piece if you have to. But whatever. Learn these things. Take time to learn in every way you can. But books are a good way to do it, but I know you like to have it on a tablet or on your telephone or whatever. It's kind of handy. Or, you know, other ways that you want to learn this thing out of school. And we're going to be talking about more schools here in the future. But whatever, learn these things, and you're going to love whitetail hunting a lot more because of all the things you know. So, now, with that, enough. Before you click off, be sure to hit that subscribe, that red spot right down below the screen here. Hit that. That's for me. It's not for you. Well, it's going to tell you, wow, Dr. Nordberg has just published a new seminar. So it'll tell you right away, oh, there, it's got a new one, so you'll watch it. You'll get that, but it's important for me in my future as a seminar speaker on the internet. So do that. And also, click that thumbs up button if you enjoyed what you learned today, because that's equally important to me as a seminar speaker in the future. However, a few years I might have left to do it, being 87 years of age now. But anyway, do that, will you, as a favor to me. I would appreciate it. And with that, thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.